There's a very specific kind of moment where this decision happens, and it doesn't usually feel like a financial decision at all. It feels more like relief. You've been thinking about something for a while. Maybe it's a bike, maybe a phone, maybe even just the idea of taking a break and going somewhere for a few days. You've already imagined what it would be like to have it, how it would change your routine a little, how it would make certain things easier or more enjoyable. That part is already clear in your head. What isn't clear, at least not in the same way, is the cost. Not because the number isn't visible, it's right there, but the way it's presented changes how you experience it. Instead of one solid amount, it gets broken down into smaller pieces, monthly payments, something that fits into your existing life without forcing a major adjustment. And without realizing it, you stop asking, is this worth the full price? You start asking, can I handle this per month? Those two questions look similar, but they lead to very different decisions. You mentioned your two-wheeler loan, and there's something important in that experience that most people don't talk about openly. At the time of taking it, it probably didn't feel like a burden. If anything, it felt like you were moving forward. You were solving a problem, gaining convenience, maybe even a bit of independence. The EMI wasn't the focus, it was just the mechanism that made the decision possible. But then, over time, something subtle starts to happen. Not immediately, there's no dramatic shift. It's more like the decision slowly reveals its full shape. Every month, the payment shows up. It becomes part of your routine. And because it's consistent, you stop reacting to it emotionally. It just becomes normal. Until one day you look at the total interest you've paid or are going to pay, and that's when the original decision and the long-term reality finally sit next to each other, and they don't quite match. What makes this interesting is that none of this happens because people are unaware. People know interest exists. They know loans are expensive. This isn't hidden information. So the question isn't, why don't people understand this? A more accurate question might be, why doesn't that understanding change the decision in the moment? The situation you described about your friend's father makes this even clearer. Taking loans from private lenders for real estate isn't something someone does casually. There's usually a strong belief behind it, an expectation that the property will appreciate, that the returns will justify the cost, that the risk is temporary and manageable. And when you look at it from that perspective, the decision doesn't look irrational, it looks calculated. But that calculation depends on something outside your control behaving the way you expect it to. When it doesn't, the nature of the loan changes. It stops being a tool for growth and starts becoming something you have to sustain. And that's a very different experience.
Because now, the income that was supposed to build something is being redirected just to keep the situation from collapsing. The interest doesn't pause while you wait for things to improve. It continues, quietly, consistently, without adjusting to your expectations. There's a concept in behavioral finance, present bias, but it's often explained in a way that makes it sound like a flaw. It's not exactly a flaw. It's more like a default setting. The mind gives more weight to what feels immediate and less weight to what feels distant, not because the future doesn't matter, but because it doesn't feel as real while you're making the decision. So when you're standing there, thinking about the bike or the trip or the phone, the benefit is fully formed in your mind. You can almost experience it in advance. The cost, on the other hand, is distributed across time. It exists, but in a less tangible way. And because of that, the two sides of the decision don't compete equally. At this point, it's easy to conclude that the problem is emotional decision-making, but that explanation is slightly incomplete, because sometimes the emotion isn't just impulsive, it's meaningful. The bike might represent more than transportation. It might represent independence, or saving time, or simply making daily life less exhausting. The trip might not just be leisure. It might be an attempt to step out of a routine that's been draining for a long time. So the decision isn't just spend versus save. It becomes improve my current life now versus protect my future flexibility. And when you frame it that way, choosing the present doesn't look careless anymore. It looks understandable. But here's where the thinking needs to turn slightly. Because while the reason for the decision might be valid, the structure of the decision still matters. And that structure doesn't change based on intention.
There's an uncomfortable truth in all of this that people don't usually say out loud. Sometimes we're choosing loans because they are the best financial option. We're choosing them because they allow us to avoid a more difficult decision. Either waiting or saying no, we're accepting that we can't have something yet. And "I'll pay later" becomes a very convenient way to move forward without resolving that discomfort. If you sit with that for a moment, it starts to connect with something more personal. Because most people can think of at least one decision where the EMI felt completely reasonable at the time and slightly restrictive later. Not overwhelming, not disastrous, just enough to change how freely they could make other choices. And that's the part that rarely gets factored in, the way one decision quietly shapes the space for future decisions. So maybe the real question isn't whether paying later is good or bad. That's too broad to be useful. A more precise question might be, when you're making that decision, are you evaluating the full trade-off or just the part that feels immediate? Because the ease you feel in that moment isn't false, it's just incomplete. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes harder to ignore. Not in a way that forces you to stop making these decisions entirely, but in a way that makes you see them with more clarity. If this made you rethink even one decision you've made recently or one you're about to make, that's enough. And if you're interested in exploring more of these patterns, where money decisions start to make sense when you look at how they're actually experienced, not just how they're explained, stay with the Kepler Finance.